Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Calling your attention always to Tarpley.net. What you'll find now is a commentary which I did on Thursday of this week. That would be Thursday, the 22nd of April. Programmatic note on Russia Today in response to Obama's Wall Street speech, if we can call it that, his posturing, actually laying out what should be done to bridle the derivatives. And we'll get to that in just a second. Just a little bit more context on this. Greece will now have to go groveling to the International Monetary Fund. This is a huge defeat for the European Union that a member state, instead of being taken care of by the European Central Bank, is going to have to grovel to the IMF and undergo this horrendous regime of a letter of intent responding to IMF conditionalities, which are always another round of deadly killer austerity on top of what's already been imposed. And naturally, the Greeks will fight. Greece is now ungovernable. This place will descend into chaos because you've got the British asset family, Papandreou, running the show. And we wish the Greek labor movement all the best success in the resistance that they can put up. But they would need to essentially knock out Papandreou and put up an economic populist prime minister who would implement New Deal measures. And what might those be? Well, one of them, obviously, is a debt moratorium. If you can't do your capital controls, exchange controls, because you don't control your own currency, you can do things with a Tobin tax. You can start taxing derivatives. You can prevent various hedge funds from attacking the bond market. You can ban some of them from doing business in Greece. But if this gang of hedge funds gets their way, then they're going to have to consider what all sorts of countries, great states, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, they've all done it, the big, the small, the left wing, the right wing, the Catholic, the Muslim, they've all done it. We go through a list another time. Well, maybe it's time for Greece to join that list. And you simply essentially say that we're freezing all payments on international financial debt for the duration of the crisis, 5 years or the duration of the crisis. It's open-ended. So as long as there's a world depression, which there is unmistakably, then the Greeks would have to say, sorry, we can't pay. And then you get your house in order. And getting your house in order is not imposing draconian austerity. It's relaunching your economy with 0% internally generated credit by forcing the central bank to disgorge it, build infrastructure, and pick 4 or 5 priorities in terms of modern industry, modern production, where Greece can become a world leader or at least contend to be a world leader. And obviously, you want to have all kinds of cultural tourism because it is Greece, but you can't build it on that. It's got to be high value-added, high-tech, very modern, and see where Greece can enjoy a competitive advantage, so that you've got to go to the Greeks to get something in the same way you've got to go to the Germans today. If you want precision instruments for your medical offices, you're going to have to go to Germany. It's just the way it is. So the IMF, of course, the history is that France in the 1950s, when they had the weak governments of the Fourth Republic, had to go to the IMF all the time. The British and the Italians had to go to the IMF as recently as 1974, 75, 76, and so forth. And this is always an ugly spectacle. It's a real abdication of responsibility. It basically begins to prove the worthlessness of the European Union, even in practical terms. If they can't defend Greece against these monstrous predators of the IMF, then what good are they? And, of course, they're the European Central Bank, monstrous predators in their own right. Hedge fund mayhem, and what are you going to do about it? By the way, certain byproducts of this. The Belgian government has just collapsed. This is Prime Minister Yves Leterme, Leterme. So his term is over. He's been ousted over what seem to be local issues, but it's all part of this general idea. It's burning time. We're facing ungovernability in Europe, the United States, Japan, where Hatoyama is down to 25% approval. He's headed for paralysis This is happening all over the place. When you have a depression, parliamentary, congressional government breaks down because there's an indispensable material basis for representative democracy. And if you have a depression, when the only role of government is to distribute sacrifices of this kind of draconian severity, then you can begin to kiss democracy goodbye. So if you don't like dictatorship, you better do something to stop the depression. Because if you let the depression go on with the dreams of Austrian sugar plums and business cycles and recoveries in your head, nothing will happen. You don't get out of a depression until you change policies and pull yourself up out of a depression. Now, the obvious parallels here in terms of history, this is the second wave of the depression. And it's uncanny, once again, looking back to the events of approximately 79, 80 years ago. I have here in front of me the memoirs of Herbert Hoover, and he divides the depression of that era into a series of phases. And he says the first phase of the depression is from the New York stock market crash of October 1929 until April of 1931. And that's his way of looking at the breakdown of this into phases. Because people think, well, there was the stock market crash of October 1929, and then there was the depression. There are two more events that are actually much bigger and much more important than the stock market crash. So here's what Herbert Hoover writes. The second phase of the depression starts in April 1931. In the spring of 1931, that's basically 2 years after the big panic began, more or less where we are now. In the spring of 1931, just as we had begun to entertain well-founded hopes that we were on our way out of depression, our latent fears about Europe were realized in a gigantic explosion which shook the whole foundation of the world's economic, political, and social structure. Does that sound familiar? That's what's happening right now. Greece, Spain, Portugal, Italy already the third largest sovereign debtor in the world. The British, really worse off than any of these countries, not far behind. And they're a huge sovereign debtor, getting bigger all the time. They're trying to bring in a new, a kind of an Obama figure, this guy Clegg. Watch out for people that you're not familiar with. So Herbert Hoover talks to the Gridiron Club in Washington, April 27th, 1931, just, 79 years ago. He says, if by the grace of God we've passed through the worst of this storm, this depression, the future months will be easy, but we may be called upon to endure more, so we have to gird ourselves for greater effort. And then he begins to get reports. May 7th, 1931, the U.S. ambassador to Germany tells him that Brüning, the German chancellor that we've been talking about for some weeks, gave him a report of the disastrous financial crisis then developing in Germany. And then this becomes public. May 13th, 1931, the Kreditanstalt, written Kreditanstalt, right? Kreditanstalt of Vienna, the largest bank in Austria, blows up. The Kreditanstalt, he gets a report, was in such trouble that depositors were rioting outside of its offices demanding money, sort of what's going on in Greece right now. On May 15th, our legation in Budapest reported great excitement and panic runs on the banks in Hungary over rumors of financial difficulties. This could be happening very soon. And then we get other signs of depression. So we're basically reenacting the second wave of that depression. That's what's hitting us now. We'll be back in a minute.